Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard the story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The mist hung low over Willow Creek in October of 1902, an unusually cold autumn even for the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. Situated in a hidden valley between Mount Rogers and White Top Mountain, Willow Creek was a place most travelers would pass right by, never knowing of its existence. The settlement consisted of perhaps 20 homesteads scattered along the valley floor, with several cabins perched precariously on the surrounding ridges. For generations, the valley dwellers lived in relative isolation, their lives dictated by the unforgiving rhythms of mountain existence. According to county records from Floyd County, Virginia, the disappearance of Dr. Ambrose Radcliffe was first reported on October 17, 1902. What makes this case particularly disturbing isn't just that Dr. Radcliffe vanished without a trace, but rather what was discovered in the aftermath of his disappearance. As we piece together this narrative from courthouse documents, personal journals, and testimonies collected by Sheriff Josiah Montgomery in 1903, we reveal a story that challenges our understanding of human nature itself. Dr. Radcliffe had arrived in Willow Creek just 6 months earlier in April 1902, establishing himself as the area's first physician. According to journals kept by Abigail Hollister, the schoolteacher in nearby Damascus, Radcliffe had previously practiced medicine in Richmond, but sought the mountain air for what he described as restoration of the spirit. A well-educated man in his early 40s, unmarried and financially comfortable, his arrival was initially welcomed by the community that had previously relied on folk healers and midwives. The Willow Creek community, as documented in church records from 1900, consisted primarily of several interconnected families who had settled the area following the Civil War. The Harlan clan occupied most of the valley's eastern ridge, with Patriarch Josiah Harlan serving as the unofficial leader of the settlement. The Pendletons farmed the valley floor, while the Corvus family, known for their reclusive nature, maintained a scattered presence on the western slopes. Marriage between these families was common, creating a tightly woven community suspicious of outsiders. Sheriff Montgomery's initial investigation notes reveal that on the night of October 15, 1902, Radcliffe was called to attend to Silas Pendleton, who had reportedly suffered a serious injury while hunting. According to Martha Pendleton's testimony, the doctor arrived at their homestead around 8 p.m., attended to her husband, and departed approximately 2 hours later, heading back toward his cabin, located roughly 3 miles north of the Pendleton property. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Dr. Ambrose Radcliffe. When the doctor failed to respond to a medical emergency the following day, concern slowly began to spread through the settlement. Abel Corvus, who had sought the doctor's assistance for his ailing wife, reported finding Radcliffe's cabin empty, the bed unslept in, though, oddly, his medical bag remained on his desk. More curious still was the half-written letter found beside it, addressed to a colleague in Richmond. The letter ended mid-sentence. "I have observed something in these mountains that defies medical explanation. The Harlan condition appears to be hereditary, but its manifestation suggests." The search for Dr. Radcliffe was initially modest, a few men checking the trail between the Pendleton property and the doctor's cabin. But as days passed, the effort expanded. Sheriff Montgomery, arriving from the county seat on October 22nd, organized a more thorough search party. According to his official report, they found only one trace of the missing physician. His pocket watch, discovered approximately 1 mile from the trail, deep in a densely wooded ravine locals called Hollows Deep. The watch glass was shattered, the hands frozen at 11:17. Perhaps what's most unsettling about this case is how quickly the community's concern for their missing doctor transformed into something else entirely. By the time Sheriff Montgomery arrived, he noted in his personal journal that the residents of Willow Creek seemed more interested in ensuring he didn't investigate too thoroughly than in actually locating Dr. Radcliffe. "These people guard their privacy with unusual vigor," he wrote. "They answer questions with questions and speak in half-truths and veiled warnings. What the community couldn't have anticipated was that Dr. Radcliffe had been methodically documenting his observations since his arrival. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his cabin, discovered by Deputy Warren Caldwell on October 23rd, was a leather journal containing detailed notes on what Radcliffe termed the Willow Creek affliction. The journal, now preserved in the Floyd County Historical Society archives, provides a disturbing window into what may have befallen the doctor. In entries dating from June through early October 1902, Radcliffe documented a peculiar condition affecting numerous members of the Harland family and, to a lesser extent, the Pendletons and Corvus clans. The symptoms began subtly: joint stiffness, sensitivity to light, and an unusual paleness of the skin. But as the condition progressed, Radcliffe noted more alarming developments: changes in vocal patterns, nocturnal restlessness, and what he described as physiological adaptations seemingly impossible in medical literature. Most concerning were his observations of the Harland patriarch Josiah. Subject exhibits remarkable mobility despite advanced age, estimated 70+. Radcliffe wrote on September 2nd, "Observed climbing steep terrain with inhuman agility. When approached, he displayed a startling awareness of my presence, despite my careful approach from downwind. Most disturbing was his reaction to my unexpected appearance, a sound emanating from his throat that bore no resemblance to human vocalization." A subsequent entry, dated September 28th, reads, "I believe the condition affecting the Willow Creek residents represents an entirely unknown physiological adaptation to prolonged isolation in these mountains. The Harlands, in particular, show signs of something beyond mere disease. It appears to be an evolutionary divergence. What they are becoming, I cannot say with certainty, but I no longer believe I am documenting an illness so much as witnessing a transformation." Sheriff Montgomery's investigation took a concerning turn when he attempted to interview Josiah Harland. According to his report, upon approaching the Harland homestead, he was met by several male family members who blocked his path. They informed him that the elderly patriarch was too ill to speak with outsiders. When Montgomery insisted, citing his official capacity, one of the men, identified as Ezekiel Harland, leaned in and whispered, "Some secrets these mountains keep for themselves, Sheriff. Best you remember that if you aim to leave these hills." The investigation might have ended there, with Dr. Radcliffe classified as missing, presumed deceased, perhaps from a fall in the treacherous mountain terrain. However, two discoveries in November 1902 complicated the narrative considerably. First was the testimony of Jerome Chapman, a hunter from a neighboring community. While tracking deer in the forest approximately 4 miles northwest of the settlement, Chapman claimed to have seen a man what looked like the doctor moving through the trees at dusk. What made the sighting remarkable was Chapman's insistence that Dr. Radcliffe was not alone, but accompanied by several figures he couldn't clearly identify. More disturbing was his description of their movement. Not like walking, more like they was flowing across the ground, fast-like, keeping low. The second discovery came from Deputy Caldwell, who, against Sheriff Montgomery's orders, returned to Willow Creek in early November to conduct his own investigation. In an isolated cabin belonging to Thaddeus Corvus, Caldwell found what he described in his sworn statement as medical implements belonging to Dr. Radcliffe, along with various glass containers of unknown substances, and, most alarmingly, a collection of anatomical specimens unlike anything in my experience. Before Caldwell could remove these items as evidence, he reported being confronted by several members of all three families. No violence occurred, but the deputy described their manner as threatening beyond words. He departed empty-handed, only to discover upon reaching his horse that someone had placed a small cloth bundle in his saddlebag. Inside was Dr. Radcliffe's medical school graduation ring wrapped in a piece of paper bearing a single sentence, "The doctor has found his purpose among us." Sheriff Montgomery, upon receiving Caldwell's report, organized a larger party to return to Willow Creek, including law enforcement officers from neighboring counties. What they found upon their arrival on November 12, 1902, was documented in the official report as evidence of hasty departure. The cabin stood empty, possessions abandoned, livestock either slaughtered or set free. The entire community, estimated at between 60 and 70 individuals, had vanished overnight. A thorough search of the settlement revealed several disturbing details. In the Harland family cemetery, investigators discovered that numerous graves had been recently excavated from the inside. The dirt appeared to have been pushed upward from below, and the coffins, visible in several open graves, had splintered outward. In Josiah Harland's cabin, they found an extensive collection of journals dating back to the 1830s, documenting what appeared to be the deliberate isolation of the community and selective breeding practices among the families. Most significant was a hidden chamber discovered beneath the floorboards of the community's small church. Accessed through a trap door concealed under the pulpit, the space contained what Montgomery's report clinically describes as evidence of medical experimentation. Deputy Caldwell's personal journal, however, provides a more visceral account. The room contained various surgical implements, some recognizable, others seemingly crafted for purposes I dare not contemplate. Diagrams covered one wall, showing human anatomy with modifications that defy comprehension. Most disturbing were the restraints bolted to a central table, showing considerable signs of use. The final entry in Sheriff Montgomery's official report acknowledges that no trace of Dr. Radcliffe's remains was ever found. However, he includes a personal observation that would later be stricken from court records. "I no longer believe we are searching for a victim, but rather an accomplice." Whatever occurred in Willow Creek, evidence suggests that Dr. Radcliffe, after initial documentation of his findings, became an active participant in whatever transformation afflicted these people. To understand the full context of the Willow Creek incident, we must examine the medical and social landscape of the Blue Ridge Mountains in 1902. The early 20th century marked a transitional period for medicine in rural America. Modern medical practices were gradually replacing traditional folk healing, but in isolated mountain communities, this transition occurred far more slowly than in urban centers. The Blue Ridge Mountains, with their challenging terrain and limited access routes, had fostered unique communities with distinct cultural practices. The very geography that made them difficult to reach had preserved older ways of life well into the 20th century. Many mountain communities still relied primarily on herbal remedies, midwives, and folk healers known locally as granny women. These practitioners combined extensive knowledge of medicinal plants with spiritual practices and practical skills passed down through generations. According to historical accounts from neighboring communities, the residents of Willow Creek were considered unusual even by local standards. Martha Jenkins, a midwife from Damascus who occasionally traded with the Willow Creek families, noted in her diary that they kept to themselves more than most, seldom attending county functions or market days. She also observed that they seemed to suffer from unusual physical characteristics, which she attributed to bad water or poor breeding stock. What made Dr. Radcliffe's arrival in Willow Creek particularly significant was that he represented the first formal medical presence in the community's history. Based on correspondence found in his Richmond apartment after his disappearance, Radcliffe had initially traveled to the mountains seeking relief from what he described as a profound professional disillusionment, following several failed experimental treatments at his former hospital. A colleague, Dr. Harrison Webb of the Medical College of Virginia, later told investigators that Radcliffe had become obsessed with evolutionary biology and adaptation in human populations. In a letter dated February 1902, Radcliffe wrote to Webb, I am convinced that isolated populations may develop physiological adaptations that modern medicine has never documented. The mountains, with their pockets of genetic isolation, may harbor the very evidence I seek. What Radcliffe found in Willow Creek appears to have exceeded even his expectations. His journal entries reveal a progression from clinical observation to something approaching religious fervor. An entry from July 15th reads, "The standard medical paradigm cannot account for what I am witnessing here. These are not symptoms of disease, but rather evidence of the human form's astonishing capacity for adaptation when isolated from the homogenizing effect of broader genetic exchange." More concerning is his August 3rd entry. "I have begun to test my hypothesis through direct intervention. The Harlan Patriarch has agreed to allow me to administer a series of compounds derived from local flora, combined with elements from my own pharmacopoeia. The results thus far have been promising, accelerating what appears to be an already ongoing process of adaptation." The Blue Ridge Mountains themselves played a crucial role in the events at Willow Creek. Geologically ancient, the Blue Ridge Range contains some of the oldest exposed rocks on the North American continent, dating back over 1 billion years. The mountains were already old when dinosaurs walked the earth, having been thrust upward by the collision of tectonic plates hundreds of millions of years ago. This great age meant the mountains had developed unique ecological niches and unusual mineral compositions in certain isolated valleys. Local geologist Professor Arthur Whitman, who examined soil samples from Willow Creek in 1904 as part of a broader survey, noted anomalous concentrations of rare earth elements and unusual fungal spores not documented elsewhere in the region. His findings, published in the obscure Journal of Appalachian Geology, were largely ignored at the time, but have since prompted speculation about potential environmental factors contributing to the Willow Creek mystery. Compounding the unusual geological composition was the valley's unique topography. Surrounded on 3 sides by steep ridges and accessed only by a narrow pass that frequently flooded during spring thaws, Willow Creek existed in nearly complete isolation for months at a time. Winter snow often blocked the pass entirely from December through March, forcing the community to be entirely self-sufficient during those periods. His report to the Regional Baptist Convention describes the settlement as a place apart from God's light, where the inhabitants have developed customs and practices at odds with Christian teaching. Collins never specified what these practices were, but he concluded his report by recommending that no further missionary efforts be directed toward the community, stating ominously that some soil is too poisoned to nurture the seeds of salvation. The question of what exactly was happening to the residents of Willow Creek, whether environmental, genetic, or deliberately induced, remains the most disturbing aspect of this case. This isolation had profound effects on the community's development. Church records from Bristol, Virginia, indicate that a Baptist missionary named Jeremiah Collins visited Willow Creek in 1871 and was disturbed by what he encountered. Dr. Radcliffe's journal suggests all 3 factors may have been at work. His observations detail what appears to be a multi-generational pattern of physiological changes that he believed were adaptations to the specific conditions of the valley. Most notable among these changes were heightened sensory capabilities, particularly night vision and hearing, along with physiological alterations that allowed for more efficient oxygen use at higher elevations. These adaptations might have been beneficial, even advantageous, for mountain dwelling. But Radcliffe's later entries describe more extreme manifestations, unusual joint flexibility that allowed for movement patterns more reminiscent of quadrupedal locomotion than bipedal, dermis that had developed unusual properties of thickness and resilience, and most disturbingly, alterations to the digestive system that allowed for the consumption and processing of food sources typically indigestible to humans. By September 1902, Radcliffe's scientific detachment had given way to something more problematic, His writing became more fragmented, his observations interspersed with philosophical ruminations. What if our current form is merely transitional? What if human evolution continues not toward greater intellect, but toward perfect adaptation to specific environmental niches? The residents of Willow Creek may represent not an aberration, but a glimpse of divergent evolutionary pathways. Humanity's future splintered into specialized forms, each perfectly suited to its environment. More disturbing still was his October 11th entry, the last complete entry before his disappearance. I have begun to experience the changes myself. At first, I attributed the sensations to suggestion, the power of the mind to manifest physical symptoms. Now I am certain something more profound is occurring. My night vision has improved markedly. My sense of smell has become acute to the point of discomfort in the presence of certain chemicals I once used without notice. Most remarkable is the change in my musculature, a flexibility and strength I have never possessed. Josiah says this is merely the beginning. The relationship between Dr. Radcliffe and Josiah Harland emerges as a central element in understanding what transpired at Willow Creek. Sheriff Montgomery's investigation uncovered evidence suggesting that the two men had been in correspondence before Radcliffe's arrival in the community. Among Josiah Harland's possessions was a letter from Radcliffe dated December 1901, indicating that the doctor had learned of the unusual characteristics of the Willow Creek residents through medical colleagues and was seeking permission to study the community. Harland's response, if there was one, has never been found. But given Radcliffe's subsequent arrival and apparent welcome into the community, it seems the patriarch saw something of value in the doctor's interest. Perhaps Harland recognized in Radcliffe someone who could help accelerate or direct whatever process was already underway in Willow Creek. To properly contextualize this relationship, we must understand Josiah Harland's position in the community. Church and county records indicate that the Harland family had been present in the valley since at least 1817, when Josiah's grandfather, Ezekiel Harland, first purchased land there. Over the subsequent decades, the Harlands had become the dominant family, both numerically and in terms of influence. Josiah himself was something of an enigma. Born in 1832, according to the county birth register, he would have been 70 years old in 1902. Yet multiple witnesses described him as possessing the vitality and strength of a much younger man. He had been married 3 times, each marriage producing numerous offspring. Most unusually for the time and region, he was literate and possessed an extensive library, including works on medicine, biology, and philosophy that would have been considered advanced even for a university-educated man of the era. A distant cousin, Matthias Harland of Roanoke, told investigators that Josiah had spent several years away from the mountains in his youth, supposedly attending a medical college in Philadelphia. No records confirming this education have ever been found, but Matthias insisted that Josiah returned to Willow Creek in the 1850s with strange ideas and stranger practices, which he began implementing within the community. These practices apparently included strict control over marriages within the settlement, dietary restrictions, and unusual nocturnal activities that Matthias declined to specify. When pressed by Sheriff Montgomery, Matthias would only say, "Cousin Josiah believed that mankind was capable of becoming something more than what we are. He didn't see being human as the end of our journey, but rather as a stage to pass through on the way to something else." Whatever Josiah Harland believed, by 1902, the entire community of Willow Creek appears to have embraced his vision. The evidence suggests that rather than being a victim, Dr. Radcliffe recognized in Willow Creek an opportunity to witness and perhaps accelerate a process of human transformation that aligned with his own scientific interests. His disappearance was not an abduction, but a conversion. The aftermath of the Willow Creek incident was perhaps as disturbing as the event itself. After the community's disappearance in November 1902, official interest in the case waned quickly. The Floyd County Court formally closed the investigation in March 1903, ruling that Dr. Radcliffe was missing, presumed deceased, due to misadventure in mountainous terrain. The abandoned settlement was sold at auction to the Appalachian Timber Company, which harvested the surrounding forest before abandoning their operations in 1907. What happened to the residents of Willow Creek, approximately 70 individuals, remains unknown. No records exist of them relocating to neighboring communities or migrating to other states. No death certificates were ever filed. They simply vanished from official existence as completely as they had vanished from their valley. However, from 1903 through the mid-1960s, a series of unusual encounters in the mountains northwest of the original settlement suggests that they didn't disappear entirely. These accounts, collected from hunters, trappers, forestry workers, and occasional travelers, describe glimpses of individuals moving through the forest in ways that defied conventional human limitations, traveling rapidly across difficult terrain, displaying unusual physical capabilities, and demonstrating an uncanny awareness of being observed. One of the most detailed accounts comes from James Weatherford, a forest ranger who, in 1923, was surveying timber in what would later become part of Jefferson National Forest. In his official report, later classified by the Forestry Service, Weatherford described encountering a group of individuals moving through a rhododendron thicket at dusk. He initially assumed they were local hunters until he observed their movement pattern. They traveled in a manner I can only describe as flowing across the landscape, Weatherford wrote. They moved on all fours when traversing difficult terrain, but this was not the awkward crawling of a normal person. Their joints appeared to bend in ways that allowed for smooth, rapid movement across rocks and fallen trees. When they detected my presence, which they did, despite my being downwind and motionless, they oriented toward me simultaneously, displaying a coordinated awareness more like a flock of birds than a group of independent humans. Weatherford observed the group from a distance of approximately 200 yards through binoculars. He described them as pale, with elongated limbs and unusual facial features, though he admitted the fading light made detailed observation difficult. Most disturbing was his description of their reaction upon detecting him. One figure stood upright and made a series of gestures to the others. Though distant, I could see its face clearly enough to note that the proportions were wrong, the jaw too pronounced, the eyes too widely set. It opened its mouth in what appeared to be communication, but produced no sound audible to me at that distance. The group then dispersed into the forest with such speed and efficiency that they vanished from sight within seconds. Similar accounts accumulated over subsequent decades. In 1934, a hunting party from Bristol reported encountering strange folk in the remote mountains who moved like nothing human and communicated with sounds no Christian throat could make. In 1947, a geological survey team documented evidence of habitation in caves near the Virginia-North Carolina border that included unusual modifications to the natural formations and implements of unknown purpose crafted from bone and metal. Perhaps most significant was the experience of Dr. Harold Curtis, a biologist from the University of Virginia who in 1951 was conducting research on salamander populations in the region. Curtis had no knowledge of the Willow Creek incident when he reported encountering what he described as human-adjacent inhabitants in a remote valley. His field journal, later donated to the university archives, contains detailed sketches of footprints and handprints that display unusual anatomical proportions, along with notes on vocalizations he recorded that defied categorization as any known human language or animal call. Curtis became so intrigued by his observations that he extended his research trip by several weeks, attempting to document the inhabitants more thoroughly. On the night of October 16, 1951, almost exactly 49 years after Radcliffe's disappearance, Curtis reported that several of the beings entered his camp while he slept. He awoke to find them examining his equipment and supplies with what he described as methodical curiosity. Most remarkably, Curtis claimed that one of the figures, taller than the others and exhibiting less extreme physiological alterations, addressed him in heavily accented but recognizable English. "We watch. Always watch. You record." Why? When Curtis explained his scientific interest, the figure replied, "Science. Yes, science brought the change. Science made the path." Before departing, the figure left an object in Curtis's camp, a tarnished medical instrument stamped with the initials AR. Curtis's account might be dismissed as fantasy, were it not for the medical instrument, which was later identified as a specialized scalpel manufactured in 1895 for the Medical College of Virginia, where Ambrose Radcliffe had studied and later taught. The instrument remains in the University of Virginia's special collections, one of the few tangible links to the Willow Creek mystery. The last significant documented encounter occurred in 1968, when a surveying team mapping the area for a proposed national park expansion discovered an extensive cave system beneath the northwest ridge of the original settlement. Inside, they found evidence of long-term habitation, not prehistoric, but dating to the early to mid-20th century. Among the artifacts recovered was a leather physician's bag containing surgical instruments manufactured circa 1900, along with a journal whose water-damaged pages contained only fragmentary text. One legible passage, however, sent ripples through the historical community when compared with Radcliffe's known handwriting. The adaptation continues beyond my wildest expectations. The third generation now demonstrates capabilities that can only be described as evolutionary leaps. We have transcended. What began as my observation has become my transformation. The human constraints I once inhabited feel like a half-remembered dream. The darkness holds no fears when one has become a creature of twilight. The survey team's discovery was quickly contained by federal authorities. The cave entrance collapsed in what was officially recorded as a natural structural failure. The artifacts were transferred to a research facility in Arlington, Virginia, where they were cataloged and stored. In 1969, a fire destroyed that section of the facility, eliminating all physical evidence from the cave discovery. The surveyor who originally discovered the journal died in an apparent hiking accident 6 months later. Since then, the federal government has maintained an unusual level of restriction on access to certain areas of Jefferson National Forest, particularly the region northwest of the original Willow Creek settlement. Official explanations cite sensitive ecological zones and unstable geological formations, but local guides and longtime residents speak of areas where electronic equipment mysteriously fails, where compasses spin uselessly, and where even the most experienced woodsmen find themselves disoriented by an overwhelming sense that the forest is watching. Perhaps most disturbing is the pattern of disappearances that has persisted in the region since the 1940s. Approximately once every decade, a solitary hiker or hunter vanishes within a specific area of the forest. Despite extensive searches, no remains have ever been recovered. What connects these disappearances is their timing. All occurred within a 3-day window of the October full moon, the same lunar phase during which Dr. Radcliffe vanished in 1902. To fully appreciate the significance of the Willow Creek incident, we must consider it within the broader context of the Blue Ridge Mountains history. The region in 1902 was experiencing profound economic and social changes. The Industrial Revolution had reached even these isolated mountains, with logging companies, mining operations, and the railroad pushing ever deeper into previously undisturbed areas. These industrial incursions dramatically altered the landscape and disrupted communities that had existed in relative isolation for generations. The Appalachian Timber Company, which purchased the Willow Creek land after the community's disappearance, was just one of many commercial enterprises exploiting the region's natural resources. By 1910, vast sections of the Blue Ridge had been clear-cut, their ancient forests reduced to stumps and eroded soil. Mining operations were equally transformative. Copper, iron, and even gold were extracted from the mountains, leaving behind scarred landscapes and polluted streams. The mines brought an influx of outside workers, further disrupting the social fabric of isolated communities. According to census records, the population of Floyd County increased by nearly 15% between 1890 and 1900, primarily due to industrial expansion. In this context, isolated communities like Willow Creek faced a stark choice: assimilate into the changing economic landscape or retreat further into isolation. Most chose some form of adaptation to modern life, accepting new technologies, economic practices, and social connections, even as they maintained aspects of their traditional culture. What makes the Willow Creek case so unusual is that this community appears to have chosen a third path, a form of adaptation so radical that it took them beyond the boundaries of conventional humanity. The pattern of disappearances associated with the region raises particularly troubling questions. The first documented case after the community's disappearance occurred in October 1912, when a timber surveyor named Martin Grayson vanished while working in an area approximately 7 miles northwest of the original settlement. His equipment was found neatly arranged beside his camp with no signs of struggle or animal predation. The only unusual element was a series of distinctive scratches on several nearby trees, described in the search party's report as similar to claw marks, but with a pattern suggesting deliberate creation rather than random animal activity. In October 1922, a similar disappearance occurred when Hunter Frederick Watkins failed to return from a 3-day expedition in the same general area. His hunting companions reported that he had separated from the group to track a deer and never rejoined them. Again, an extensive search revealed no trace of the missing man, though several searchers reported hearing unusual vocalizations during the night that they initially mistook for owl calls, until realizing the sounds were coming from multiple directions simultaneously, seemingly in response to one another. The pattern continued in 1932 with the disappearance of botanist Edward Kleinman, who was conducting a survey of rare plant species in the region. His field notes, recovered from his abandoned camp, document his growing interest in unusual fungal growths found exclusively in the area. His final entry mentions his intention to follow a small stream to its source, where he believed he would find the origin of these fungi. The search for Kleinman was particularly thorough, involving more than 50 men combing the area for over 2 weeks. The only potential evidence was a single boot print found near a rocky outcropping, described as resembling a human foot, but with unusual proportions and what appeared to be claw-like extensions where the toes would normally be. The 1942 disappearance of wildlife photographer Richard Pierce introduced a new element to the pattern. Pierce had been documenting deer populations in the national forest when he vanished. 3 days after search efforts began, his camera was discovered nearly 5 miles from his last known position. When the film was developed, the final 3 exposures showed a sequence of images that the developing technician described as severely overexposed and blurred, but appearing to show elongated pale figures moving between trees at the edge of a clearing. These photographs have since been lost, officially attributed to improper storage, though rumors persist that they were deliberately destroyed or classified by federal authorities. The most thoroughly documented disappearance occurred in October 1952, when geologist Dr. Marion Blackwood vanished while collecting mineral samples from a remote area of the forest. Blackwood, an experienced outdoorsman and military veteran, had informed colleagues at the U.S. Geological Survey of unusual mineral deposits he had discovered during previous expeditions. "These formations shouldn't exist in this geological context," he wrote in a letter to the USGS headquarters. The crystalline structures and elemental composition suggest conditions more consistent with deep earth deposits than surface accessible formations. The search for Blackwood involved not only local authorities but also federal agents, ostensibly present due to his government employment. What made this case particularly notable was the discovery of his field journal, found in a waterproof container nearly 10 miles from his campsite. The journal's final entries document Blackwood's growing awareness of being observed. "Something is watching from the ridge line," he wrote 3 days before his disappearance. "I initially assumed deer or perhaps a bear, but the stillness is wrong. Whatever observes does so with purpose and patience no animal possesses." His final entry, dated October 17, 1952, reads, "They've been circling the camp for 2 nights now. I've caught glimpses, pale, elongated forms moving with impossible speed through the underbrush. They make sounds like nothing I've heard in nature or civilization. Tonight I will attempt contact. I've arranged my samples and notes for collection in case I don't return. I believe they are connected to the mineral anomalies, perhaps drawn to them, perhaps the cause of them. Either way, I go now to seek answers." The journal was officially entered into evidence, but mysteriously vanished from the Floyd County Sheriff's records room 6 months later. What connects these disappearances beyond their timing and location is the reaction of authorities. In each case, the initial search was vigorous but brief. Official explanations invariably cited natural causes, animal attacks, accidental falls, or simply becoming lost in difficult terrain. Yet, in each instance, federal authorities became involved in some capacity, and searches were often terminated prematurely despite the absence of bodies or conclusive evidence. Local residents have developed their own understanding of these events. In the small communities surrounding the national forest, elders advise never to venture deep into certain valleys alone. Hunters avoid specific ridges and hollows regardless of the potential game. Even experienced guides refuse to lead expeditions to certain areas, citing vague concerns about bad air or disorienting terrain. The formal explanations may attribute these behaviors to superstition, but those who live in the shadow of the mountains recognize them as survival adaptations developed through generations of coexistence with something that defies easy categorization. The Willow Creek case raises profound questions about the boundaries of human adaptation and the potential for evolutionary divergence within isolated populations. What Radcliffe appears to have discovered and ultimately embraced was a community in the midst of transforming itself, whether through environmental pressures, deliberate manipulation, or some combination of both. His scientific training allowed him to recognize and document this process, but it didn't protect him from being drawn into it himself. This brings us to what may be the most disturbing aspect of the entire case: the possibility that what happened at Willow Creek wasn't an isolated incident, but rather an extreme example of processes that might be occurring, albeit more slowly and subtly, in other isolated communities around the world. The human genome contains remarkable plasticity, capable of producing significant variations in response to environmental pressures over surprisingly few generations. Modern research into epigenetics, changes in gene expression that don't alter the underlying DNA sequence, suggests that environmental factors can trigger adaptations that pass to subsequent generations far more rapidly than traditional evolutionary theory would predict. If the residents of Willow Creek, under Josiah Harlan's guidance, and later with Radcliffe's scientific assistance, found ways to accelerate these processes, they may represent not an aberration, but a preview of potential human divergence when isolated populations adapt to specific environmental niches over generations. The disturbing implication is that human may be a more fluid category than we typically acknowledge, with boundaries that can shift in response to environmental pressures and deliberate intervention. In 1962, anthropologist Dr. Elizabeth Morgan published a controversial paper titled "Adaptive Isolation in Appalachian Communities," documenting subtle physiological differences in populations that had remained relatively isolated for multiple generations. Her research in remote mountain communities noted differences in lung capacity, blood oxygen utilization, joint flexibility, and sensory acuity that she attributed to genetic adaptation to mountain environments. Though her findings were initially dismissed by mainstream anthropology, recent genetic studies have partially vindicated her work, confirming that human populations can develop specific adaptations to high-altitude environments within as few as 20 generations. Morgan never studied the Willow Creek case specifically, but in personal correspondence discovered after her death in 1989, she referenced rumors of extreme adaptation in certain isolated valleys, and expressed frustration that areas she wished to study were inexplicably restricted by federal authorities. She speculated that if moderate isolation can produce the adaptations I've documented, more extreme isolation combined with environmental pressures or deliberate selection might result in divergence so pronounced that we would question whether the resulting population remained fully human in the conventional sense. This brings us to a final deeply unsettling possibility, that the descendants of the Willow Creek community continue to exist in the remote regions of the Blue Ridge Mountains, having adapted so thoroughly to their environment that they can remain undetected despite ongoing human encroachment into their territory. The periodic disappearances might represent not random accidents, but deliberate contact, perhaps to observe the outside world through its representatives, to obtain needed supplies or information, or for purposes we cannot begin to fathom with our limited understanding of what they may have become. In 1984, folklorist Margaret Simmons conducted interviews with elderly residents of communities surrounding the former Willow Creek settlement, seeking to document any oral traditions related to the vanished community. What she found was a persistent reluctance to discuss the subject directly. Many interviewees would fall silent when Willow Creek was mentioned, or change the subject abruptly. One elderly woman, however, Ida Mae Burrell, then 96 years old, provided a cryptic but disturbing account. Born in 1888 in Damascus, Virginia, Burrell claimed to have visited Willow Creek as a young woman with her father, who occasionally traded with the settlement. They weren't like us even then, she told Simmons. They moved different, talked different. Pa said they was changing and it wasn't natural. Said God never intended people to go the way they was going. When Simmons asked what she meant by changing, Burrell became agitated. They was adapting, she said. That's what that doctor called it. I heard Pa talking about it with Ma. Said the Harlans was adapting to live better in the deep hollows, where normal folk couldn't survive the winters or the isolation. But they was paying a price for it. They was becoming something else, something that wasn't rightly human no more. Burrell claimed that after the community's disappearance, stories circulated about night folk in the deep forests northwest of the settlement. Nobody went hunting up there alone after that, she said. Not if they had any sense, because sometimes the night folk would hunt you back. When asked if she believed these stories, Burrell fixed Simmons with a steady gaze. Belief ain't got nothing to do with it, she replied. Some things just are, whether you believe in them or not. And what those people became, what they're still becoming up in those mountains, that's real. That's happening, whether anyone believes it or not. Simmons's interview with Burrell, along with similar accounts she collected, was submitted to the Journal of Appalachian Studies in 1986. The article was rejected, with editors citing insufficient scholarly evidence and reliance on folklore rather than documented fact. Simmons died in 1989, her research largely forgotten until recent interest in the Willow Creek case brought it back to attention. What makes this case so disturbing is not just the disappearance of a community or the suggestion of physiological transformation that defies conventional understanding. It's the implication that this transformation was not an end point, but a process that continues to this day. That somewhere in the remote reaches of the Blue Ridge Mountains, descendants of the Willow Creek community continue to adapt and evolve along a path that diverges increasingly from mainstream humanity. In 2010, a team from the National Institutes of Health conducted a genetic survey of isolated mountain communities throughout Appalachia, seeking to document unique genetic markers that might have medical significance. The study was abruptly terminated when the team attempted to collect samples in the region surrounding the former Willow Creek settlement. No official explanation was provided, but a researcher who spoke anonymously claimed that the team had discovered genetic markers so divergent from baseline human genome sequences that they initially registered as contamination from non-human DNA. This claim cannot be verified, as all data from that portion of the study was classified under a federal security order. The lead researcher subsequently accepted a position at a government facility with no public profile and has declined all requests for interviews since 2011. What can be verified is that the United States Forest Service maintains an unusual level of surveillance on certain areas of Jefferson National Forest, with motion-activated cameras positioned at access points to valleys northwest of the original Willow Creek location. When questioned about these security measures through Freedom of Information Act requests, the Forest Service cites ongoing wildlife monitoring studies, despite no published research appearing in any scientific journals. Local residents who live near the forest boundaries report occasional unusual activity. Gerald Mason, whose family has owned property adjacent to the National Forest since the 1930s, described to a local newspaper in 2018 what he called strange visitors to the forest edge. They come at night, usually when the moon is full, Mason said. You don't see them directly, just movements in the trees, shadows flowing between the trunks. But sometimes you hear them communicating, not talking, not like people talk, more like, I don't know how to describe it, like whispering, but pitched higher than human voices should go, with rhythms that don't match any language I've ever heard. Mason claimed that these nocturnal visitors occasionally leave unusual marks on trees at the forest boundary, complex patterns of scratches that don't resemble typical animal markings. It's like they're leaving messages, he said, warnings maybe, or invitations. Depends on how you look at it. Perhaps most intriguing is Mason's claim that federal authorities visit his property approximately once a year, questioning him about any unusual sightings and examining the tree markings. They never say who they're with exactly, he noted. Just show government ID and ask the same questions every time. They know something's out there, something that used to be human, maybe still is in some ways, but they don't want the public to know about it. The most recent documented disappearance occurred in October 2015, when wildlife photographer Meredith Collins failed to return from a 3-day expedition to photograph autumn foliage. Her campsite was found intact, her equipment undisturbed except for her camera, which was discovered 50 yards from camp with its memory card missing. A single photograph captured on her phone shows what appears to be a tall, thin figure standing at the tree line at dusk. The image is blurry, but forestry experts who examined it noted that the figure's proportions do not conform to normal human anatomy. The search for Collins was abandoned after 5 days when several search team members reported hearing what they described as voices calling from all directions and experiencing extreme disorientation. Her disappearance was officially attributed to a likely animal attack, despite the complete absence of evidence supporting this conclusion. The Blue Ridge Mountains exist in the American consciousness as a place of natural beauty, cultural heritage, and outdoor recreation. Yet beneath this benign exterior lies a darker legacy of isolation, adaptation, and transformation. The Willow Creek case suggests that in the most remote hollows and ridges, processes may be underway that challenge our understanding of human potential and limitation. For those who venture into the deeper reaches of the mountains, local guides still offer the same advice. When the sun sets behind those western peaks, make sure you're well away from certain valleys. And if you hear what sounds like a voice calling your name from the darkening woods, walk the other way. Some calls aren't meant to be answered. What truly happened to Dr. Ambrose Radcliffe and the residents of Willow Creek remains one of the Blue Ridge Mountains' most disturbing unsolved mysteries. Did the doctor fall victim to an isolated community protecting its secrets? Did he discover some environmental factor causing physiological changes in a genetically isolated population? Or, as some of the evidence suggests, Did he find something in those ancient mountains that transformed him from investigator to participant in whatever the Willow Creek community was becoming? The Floyd County Historical Society maintains a small file on the case, though several documents have been removed over the years by various government agencies, citing reasons of public interest. The few remaining photographs show a community that appears ordinary for the period, solemn faces gazing into the camera, revealing nothing of what might have existed beneath the surface of their seemingly simple mountain lives. One photograph, however, stands out, a group portrait taken approximately 1 month before Radcliffe's disappearance, showing him standing among several members of the Harland family. While the doctor's expression is appropriately serious for a formal portrait, careful examination reveals something in his eyes that the photographer inadvertently captured. A look of fascination, bordering on obsession, and perhaps more disturbingly, recognition, as though he had discovered something in these isolated mountain people that he somehow recognized within himself. The mountains of the Blue Ridge have witnessed countless human stories over the centuries, most lost to time and the relentless rhythm of nature reclaiming what humans abandon. But something about the Willow Creek mystery suggests a different kind of endurance. The cave system discovered in 1968 has been officially stricken from Forest Service maps, the valley deliberately left as a blank space in an otherwise meticulously documented wilderness. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some secrets kept by the ancient ridges and hidden valleys of the Blue Ridge. For those inclined to explore the deeper hollows and untracked ridges of those mountains, locals still offer the same advice. When the sun sets behind those western peaks, make sure you're well away from certain valleys. And if you hear what sounds like a voice calling your name from the darkening woods, walk the other way. Some calls aren't meant to be answered. As for Dr. Ambrose Radcliffe and the people of Willow Creek, their true fate remains known only to the mountains themselves, mountains that have kept countless secrets over the millennia and will likely keep many more in the centuries to come. The Blue Ridge stands eternal, indifferent to human curiosity, holding its mysteries in the mist-shrouded hollows where sunlight struggles to reach, and where, some say, forms that were once fully human still move through the deepening shadows at dusk. Today, over a century after the events at Willow Creek, the Blue Ridge Mountains continue their slow, inexorable process of erosion and renewal. Forests grow over abandoned settlements, streams carve new paths through ancient stone, and the boundaries between wilderness and civilization shift with each passing decade. Yet something about this particular mystery refuses to fade entirely into historical obscurity. Perhaps it's because the Willow Creek incident touches on something fundamental to our understanding of ourselves as a species. The question of whether human evolution has truly reached its end point, or whether, under specific conditions of isolation and environmental pressure, our form remains as mutable as that of any other organism. The residents of Willow Creek, under the guidance of Josiah Harland, and later, Dr. Radcliffe, may have discovered or deliberately induced a process of adaptation that modern science has yet to recognize as possible. Or perhaps the enduring fascination with this case stems from something more primal, the fear of what might lurk in the deep wilderness just beyond the reach of civilization. The Blue Ridge Mountains, despite centuries of settlement and exploration, retain pockets of profound isolation where the modern world has made few inroads. In those remote hollows and ridges, who can say with certainty what might have developed over generations of separation from mainstream humanity? For those drawn to the mountains, whether as hikers, hunters, or mere travelers passing through, the story of Willow Creek serves as both warning and temptation. It suggests that beyond the maintained trails and scenic overlooks lies a wilderness that conceals secrets darker and stranger than most would care to discover. Yet it also hints at possibilities beyond conventional understanding at adaptations and transformations that might reveal new dimensions of human potential. The mountains themselves remain silent on the matter, their ancient ridges revealing nothing of what they have witnessed. But on certain nights, when the mist rolls through the valleys and the full moon casts silver light across the forest canopy, local residents still report hearing unusual sounds echoing from the deep hollows, sounds that seem almost like human voices, but with tones and cadences that no human throat should be able to produce. And occasionally, travelers on remote forest roads report glimpses of pale figures moving through the trees with unsettling speed and grace, flowing across terrain that would challenge even the most experienced hiker. These sightings are always brief, always at the edge of reliable perception, and those who experience them often question afterward whether they truly saw anything at all. But for those who know the story of Willow Creek, such glimpses carry a deeper significance. They suggest that somewhere in those ancient mountains, the descendants of Dr. Radcliffe and the Willow Creek community continue their extraordinary journey of adaptation, no longer fully human perhaps, but something new, something that exists in the liminal space between what we were and what we might become. It is a journey we can observe only from a distance, and perhaps that is for the best. Some paths of transformation once taken cannot be reversed. Some adaptations, once embraced, create a gulf that can never be crossed again. The residents of Willow Creek made their choice in 1902, following their doctor into a new form of existence. What they have become in the century since remains one of the Blue Ridge Mountains' most disturbing and enduring mysteries.